Hi. Hello, everyone. So good to see so many friendly faces. I'm Sasha Tanase. I'm a designer and a researcher. I am one of the co-founders of Web3 UX. That's a user research panel dedicated for Web3. I'm also leading the UX and design research for the Threshold Network, which is the first hard merger between Keep and NewCipher network. And I am part of the team who's building TBTC, the first fully decentralized bridge from Bitcoin to Ethereum. And I like to say that my job is to transform extremely complex products into palatable bits.
Hello, I'm Daniel. I started working in this space full-time in 2017. I was part of Consensus, building an analytics platform. I moved to Consensus Diligence, so still Consensus, but doing security research. I helped found a stablecoin. I took a short break, and now I'm tech lead at Eden Block VC.
OK, so today we're going to learn about what is DX. We're going to see what's the impact of DX, and then we're going to learn about the great guideline. So developer experience is the equivalence of user experience when the primary user of the product is a developer. A developer is a highly technical user profile, so sometimes this might become an excuse for having overly complicated user journeys, and this actually leads to traumatic experiences. So due to the fact that developers are more of a technical persona, the product's UX owners end up considering developers are power users. Well, power user is a deceitful term that makes you forget that developers are normal users too, and they will actually appreciate and benefit from simple solutions just like anyone else. So let them understand a few things first. They have the potential to become power users, but they are not power users when you first present a tool, an SDK, a library to them. It actually takes time. So in order to build a developer-centric product, you need to make sure that your product is taking into account the following. You need to have best practices, take care about the user experience, and actually be mindful of the developer needs. So why should we care about DX? Well, first of all, we need not to forget that developers are at the core of our ecosystem. And Ethereum constantly attracts 20 to 25% new developers coming to Web3. So this means that Ethereum is onboarding more developers, and the need for straightforward processes might be the highest ever. So a positive DX, which is developer experience, can increase adoption and retention and the growth of chain's developer communities. Daniel, can you tell us more about the importance?
OK, so over time, we kept saying that we have to improve UX, because that was kind of stopping the blockchain adoption. But I think we have to realize that we first have to onboard developers, because most of the time, developers are building things on top of our protocol, and they allow for more adoption. This is not necessarily like kicking the can down the road or moving the responsibility to other developers, but we do have to think about those first developers and those first integrators first. There are a few areas in which developer experience is relevant, and it can have a huge impact. People can build SDKs. Those usually provide abstractions on top of smart contracts or complex systems that allows the user, which is usually the dev, to build something on top of the current system without the need to know about how things work underneath. This could, like an example, this is the periphery Uniswap contracts, which you can integrate easily. Or, for example, with Biconomy, you can do account abstraction and use their SDK without building the whole stack. Other things are smart contracts. If you are kind of starting up, it might be difficult to build everything you need right from the get-go. So the way that you design the smart contracts will have a high impact on your product adoption. In terms of blockchains, you have to think about how people will integrate, how people will extract information from your blockchain, so be mindful about that. Another thing which is less popular but still exists is web widgets. You can have small pieces of web on top of your application. And this type of effort should be done as soon as possible. So during the design process, instead of doing it after you deploy and after trying to integrate users. This allows you to focus on bringing features instead of fixing the design decisions that you made in the beginning. So it helps with more adoption. So it's important to say that this framework is not a GitHub framework, at least not yet. It is not a template you can copy and paste into your project, but it's more like a guideline that helps you plan your whole project with the developer in mind as the first user. It's a set of principles and ideas that guide you throughout the whole process. So it starts with G from good documentation. Everything starts with good documentation. If the documents are bad, nobody can check out that great piece of technology you actually built. So you have to be mindful of your audience. What is their background? What questions will they have? Do they need help installing tools? The developer space is very vast. So if your tool needs Rust to run, don't just assume that your developer knows how to use Rust. Don't assume that they have Rust installed and they know how to use Cargo. Similarly, if your tool is Python, help them set up a virtual environment. And download all tools and all of that. Each tool has its own ecosystem and its particularities. It has to be clear and simple. In the first stage, you want to guide your audience to achieve something. That initial hello world will pay for the more advanced and more difficult integrations you will help them make along the way. But help them get to a first success, and that will help them a lot during the whole process. Have examples and tutorials. Developers, especially engineers, learn by doing. So help them provide some examples for them, which they can copy, paste, and modify, and try to organize them as well as possible. Organize your documentation. So when you create documentation, think about different sections, like getting started, tutorials, reference guides, FAQs, and so on. It's also important to understand that you might have two types of users. You will have a developer who will try to integrate your tools, but you will have another type of developer who wants to contribute to your product. So understand that you need to talk to them in different ways. The next part is robustness. So in software development, a robust system has to function correctly even in the presence of a stressful environment. This can refer to the system being interacted with. If you have an API, make sure the API is up, it responds quickly and consistently. If this is related to the code dev has to write, you need to protect the user from themselves. So you have some principles. Think about paranoia. And paranoia is very easy to understand in the Web3 world because everybody is trying to destroy your product. So assume everybody wants to destroy your protocol, wants to steal your money, do all of that. The second thing is stupidity. It actually helps if you think about your user not being super, super smart. So that means you can repeat some things. They will try incorrect inputs. They will try running methods in an incorrect order. The third thing is dangerous implements. So users should not have access to things they should not interact with. Think about libraries, properties, or structures, part of your classes. Another thing is can happen, won't happen, shouldn't happen. You have a case where some things are very unlikely to happen, so have some code and have some errors that protect you from bad behavior. And I do have an example. Let's look at this class. We have the RPC client class and to the right. And to the left, we have how user, a dev, interacts with it. In this case, they need to instantiate it, they need to call, connect, and after that, they can get some information. You can do a small change to it, like what if you connect it right away? So then they won't forget to write the connect line. It's much easier to get things right. You can also do, like, if you want optionality, you can add an argument that is by default true, so it tries to connect right away, but you don't have to, if you can disable that. So now to error handling.
Yeah, so whenever you do error handling and error messaging, make sure you label them correctly. So the error message will communicate to the user how important the error is. If you label a fatal error as an info, well, you will mislead the user and they might suffer great consequences. And this might lead them to lose trust and actually stop using your product. You have to be specific, so the error messages will tell the user exactly what is wrong and should also guide the user towards a solution. It needs to be verbose. A verbose error message will describe in detail what is the issue the user encounters and will have a hold hand approach. It should tell the user what are the next steps they need to take to solve the error. It has to be non-blaming. Write your error messages in a friendly manner. It's not the user's fault that you did a very bad job. And you also have to use plain language, because even though the error is addressing devs, explaining an issue in plain language will go a long way than using terms that you've coined and nobody else understands them. And also a very good thing is to add severity grades. It's important to label the error so the user understands what is the impact within the system.
And also, I think it's important to handle errors in a dev-friendly manner. If the language supports exceptions, throw them. If the language, like Go, returns errors, return errors. So it's natural for the developer to integrate your product.
So what do you think this error says? It doesn't really matter, because you get the same error whatever the problem is. How about this error? You need to change? Yep. This one. Well, I will tell you, this one is better, but it can still be improved. The good parts are that it has a severity grade, it describes what the problem is, you know where the problem originated. However, it doesn't say what address needs to be registered, and it doesn't provide the threshold dashboard link.
So about accessibility, you think about it, you need to have it community first. So invite the developers to be part of the community as soon as possible. If you have a GitHub repo, add links to your Discord, to your Telegram group, to your Slack. You have to support your community and your developers. So make sure that issues open to the repo are taken care of. You have PRs, you check them, you help them integrate code. And have low or ideally no barriers to entry. So permissionless access, testnet availability, and if possible, no email confirmations.
And also, you should be mindful of accessibility. This is actually very useful for some of the users, but mandatory for others. So impairments can be temporary or permanent. And for example, temporary impairment is when your user has a broken arm, or is drunk, or is high, or just tired like Daniel. And the permanent impairment is when your user has, for example, color vision deficiency or astigmatism like myself. And no matter the duration of the impairment, you should be inclusive and make sure you accommodate any type of user.
Okay, so the last part, testable.
Yeah, so testability is a critical aspect of the developer experience because it impacts maintainability, reliability, and overall quality of software. So you need to make sure you're testing the documentation. The easiest way is to do a diary study. We have linked at the end some ways you can do that, and you can learn more about them. And I think we need to be mindful of the time.
We have 1 more minute. Oh, it's also important to have your code to be modular, so you can test parts of it without going through the whole process. So instead of doing 20 steps to get to the part that you actually want to test, have a way to fast forward state. It has to be deterministic. So can you reproduce your user journeys? Are they always the same? Can you freeze the state and reuse it? And if possible, provide a testing environment for your developers. So like a testing network or an easy to set up way like GitHub code spaces where with 1 click you create the whole environment and people can use it right away.
So we learned about what is DX, we learned about the importance of DX, and we learned about the great guideline, which is good documentation, robustness, error handling, accessible, and testable. And we also added these links for you, so you can check to see how actually diary studies are conducted. And also, we created this QR code to the presentation containing the links, the framework, and everything else. So thank you very much.